Hello ma'am, good day. It's me, Jaya Lopez Kumahig from BS Ed Filipino 3A. And this video tackles about the basic concepts on special and inclusive education. Before I am going to tackle its concept, let me first differentiate the two. So what is special education and what is inclusive education? Are they similar or are they different? So let us first define what is inclusive education. The given definition there is came from the internet because I did not found someone who's proponent of this. So it says that inclusive education is defined as a learning environment that promotes full personal, academic, and professional development of all learners, irrespective of race, class, color, gender, disability, sexual preference, learning style, and language. This means to say that in inclusive education, their aim there is education for all, meaning this caters all learners regardless of each other's differences. This means to say that whether if you came from the different background, different ethnicity, if you have with you have these abilities, but you as a learners will be respected. And in inclusive education, you will not be disregarded if you have this ability, and that is inclusive education in which you will learn in the same roof, in the same classroom. In addition to the definition of inclusive education, according to UNESCO 2009, it says that it is about putting the right to education into action, including all learners, respecting their diverse needs, abilities and characteristics, and eliminating all forms of discrimination in learning environment. This simply means that in an inclusive education, all learners, despite of their differences, are respected, and their right to education is protected. And eliminating all forms of discrimination means that in an inclusive education, discrimination should be or must be prevented. It should not be happen, and it must be closed out. Inclusive education is highlighted in a recent DepEd Order number 21, series of 2019, which is known as the Policy Guidelines in the K-12 Basic Education Program, in which, according to the policy, inclusive education is the key standard and the core principle of K-12 curriculum and inclusive classroom, where it is culture sensitive, gender responsive, and contextualized. And the policy uses learner-centered pedagogical method, which means that learners' preferences in learning are considered. So let's proceed to this definition of special education, where it is clearly defined as the classes or instruction designed for students with disabilities, giftedness, and talent. Meaning that in special education, this is a kind of education that is intended for students with disabilities, where they are intended to be given special concern, special instruction, or special education. So we already differentiate the inclusive education and special education, where again in inclusive education, this kind of education that is their aim is education for all regardless of each other's differences, knowing that learners are diverse. And in special education, this is intended for those students with disabilities who need special concern, special instruction. So let's proceed to the aims and objectives of inclusive education. First is education for all, as what I have stated earlier from the definition of inclusive education, where their aim is education for all, meaning that in inclusive education, they will not only select those students who have the ability to write, to read, and can do things possible, but inclusive education respects diversity. They also respect learners' differences. The second one is protection of rights. And the rights there is referred to the right of learners to be educated. And we must not say particularly in if a person has this ability, like saying what's the reason of studying and it is somehow useless. But no, religiously speaking, we are the same in the eye of the Lord, and the same also in inclusive education, that we must not threat learners as different. Instead, we are going to help them learn and protect their rights. Third is to improve and quality of education. So it is their objective of inclusive education, where in the part of educators, they will try their best in order to give the quality of education of their learners. So let us proceed to the definition of inclusion, where it is stated that it is a process of addressing and responding to diversity of needs of all learners through increasing participation in learning, culture, and communities, and reducing exclusion within and from education. This is according from UNESCO 2005. The term inclusion from the word itself, to include, where there is no separation happen in there. And in inclusion, it is clearly stated there that they are going to address the diverse needs of all learners, meaning the needs of all learners will be catered and their voices will be heard, in which this is good thing, where this increases participation in learning. Students will confidently participate in learning, where they did not feel that they are different from majority of learners. So let's proceed to related concepts on inclusive education and special education. There are two concepts, which are the mainstreaming and integration. First is the mainstreaming, which says that it is a practice of educating students with learning challenges in regular classes in less restrictive environment based on their skills. This means that mainstreaming is about placing the students with disabilities into the regular classes, where um, learners with disabilities will receive an education that is intended for non-disabled peers, and as special education staff in there, that they must provide supplementary resources fitted to the learners. And the second one is the integration, which says that it refers to the creation of spaces such regular classrooms, SPED classrooms, or pull-out services for diverse learners, according to Franklin 1996. This means that integration is about placing both SPED learners and regular class learners in one particular classroom, wherein um, pull out is not possible in integration, where pull out means that just like for example, the students may live in a classroom to work with other students depending on their interests, but in an integration, there is the same treatment, the same resources. And again, pull out is not possible in integration. So, inclusion, according to UNESCO 2017, it helps learners overcome barriers through eliminating the presence, participation, and achievements of learners. This means that inclusion creates a system-wide change to overcome barriers to quality education, where that barriers mean that the societal norms, the physical barriers, curriculum barriers, and many more barriers that hinders the learners. But in inclusion, that barriers are eliminated. With that, students are valued and engaged equally. So let's proceed to the figure, and as you can see, the figure has its differentiation about exclusion, integration, segregation, and inclusion. And for the exclusion, those person who have this ability are not welcome in a classroom. And for the integration, students are welcome in the students with disabilities or welcome in the classroom, but they have specific area where it is intended for SPED learners only. For the segregation, it is literally that they are segregated, or those students with disabilities are being placed outside of the classroom. They are not mixed to the regular classroom. And in inclusion, both SPED learners and regular learners are placed all together, joined together in one particular classroom. So, for the conceptualization of inclusion, mainstreaming, and integration, for the inclusion, it is placement of learners in regular class is based on age regardless of their abilities or disabilities. Individuation of class without pull out, and as I have said earlier, that pull out in inclusion is not possible. And again, for the inclusion, that both students with disabilities and regular students are placed all together in the same classroom. For the mainstreaming, placement in regular class is based on the admission requirement. This means that students' learning will vary depending on their unique needs and may include shadow teaching in regular class, provision for pull-out, and one-on-ones. This means that in mainstreaming, they will allow or let the students work to their co-students depending on their preferences or their interest. Or the teacher may have one-on-one teaching to their students. For the integration, it is placement in regular class in one or more subjects or activities, and may include tutorial and other learning assistance programs. So in an integration, the teacher may have the reteaching or tutorial to their students. So the Philippine Inclusive Education is defined as a process where all learners with diverse needs are given equal opportunities for a meaningful life in non-discriminatory environment. These environments foster belongingness through culturally or spiritually sensitive, learner-centered curriculum, learning processes, delivery modes, and setting. This is according to Bustos et al. 2014. And this means that Philippine Inclusive Curriculum gives equal opportunity so that students may access education for all, where they are not only consider those regular students to access education, but also they include or consider those students with disabilities or the SPED learners to access also an education. And when they access in an inclusive education, those SPED learners may feel the sense of belongingness despite of their differences. Thus, Philippine inclusive education is a good thing because this educate their aim is education for all. So the term disability is not derogatory term, while the term special might be. Derogatory means disrespectful. So when we say disability, it is in respectful manner, while when we say special, it might degrade, though you might degrade those person you are referring to, or it is disrespectful manner. And the second paragraph, the diversity of learners. So what does it mean with diversity of learners? So these are those students who are gifted and talented, those with difficulty in seeing, hearing, communicating, walking or moving, remembering and focusing, and those with challenges with self-care. So those are the referred to diverse learners. Inclusive education is transformative rather than just being alleviate. This is according to 2018. This means that students will be empowered to see the world differently. An educator will be fostered to ask an open-ended question to learners in transformative phases. And there is an involvement of experiences, as you can see in the illustration above, which presents the idea. So the first illustration presents equality, and as you can observe that learners are given the same opportunity, that is the box. And although they are given the same opportunity, but these children or the learner, especially the small learner in there, will not be able to see the game because of their differences, because of height differences. So that presents equality, where even though you are given the same opportunity, but then you still not be able to hit the expected outcome or your learning in an actual classroom setting. And equality, this presents an idea that you are about to give support to those in need, especially the children in there. So the three of them are able to see the game because the one who's in need are given additional support or given the two boxes, so they will able to see the game. And in an actual in a class setting, especially to an educator, when you are doing or making your curriculum or syllabus or lesson plan, it is a must that you are going to consider your learners, especially to their weaknesses. And also you are going to consider what are those barriers that may hinder their learning, where you are going to remove those barriers, because removing the barriers are good practice. So it is a must, because when you are going to students don't have barriers, will increase participation in learning, and they will actively and effectively will learn to you as an educator and to the learning or to the lesson. So it is said that disability is often confused with impairment. So the definition is acquainted with two disability model, which are the medical model and the social model. The first one can be seen in the left side, which is the medical model. It is the person who is the problem and the part of her body is need to be fixed. And the second one, which is the social model, it is a disability that is seen to be the cause of barriers in society, where these barriers may include negative attitudes, inaccessible environment, and inflexible organizations such as like discrimination, fear, stigma, and so on. What do you think will happen if a person is free from these barriers? So, those person or person with intellectual disability will now or can easily access to education, to buildings, to healthcare, or to their regular doings. So let's proceed to the definition of disability, where it refers to the difficulties encountered in three connected areas. First is impairments. This include the deafness, paraplegia, strabismus. The second one is activity limitation, which include the disability in walking, writing, and eating. And lastly, the participation restriction, which are the admission to school, employment, and access to building. So, these phrases presented on screen must be used properly. And as you can see, there are appropriate phrases to be used in there, which are: first is person with intellectual disability. Instead of saying intellectual disabled person, you are going to use person with intellectual disability. Second is, instead of using mentally ill, mental patient, or insane, you must use person with mental health impairment. What do you think is the reason to use this properly? Because if you are going to use this mentally ill, mental patient, or insane or disabled person to a particular person who have this disability, they might feel hurt, or in a class setting they feel shy, they feel embarrassed, or might their performances become low. So as a co-learners or as an educator, it is a must that you are going to recognize them in a respectful manner in order for them to increase their participation, and they will feel the sense of belongingness and they did not feel that they are different. So indeed, it is not the education system that have the right to a certain type of learners, but it is the education system that must adjust to meet the needs of all learners. This basically means that the school itself are going to adjust in order to meet the needs and capabilities of the students, where in making of the curriculum, it is a must that you are going to consider your students' strengths, weaknesses, limitation, capabilities, or disabilities in order for the students will meet their expected outcome. And that ends my presentation, which covers the module 1, which talks about the basic concepts on special education and inclusive education. Thank you for watching and listening, ma'am. I hope that I have shared relevant ideas about the topic. God bless po.